very much for coming out on this former day formerly known as a holiday. I am Beth Novak. I am the director of the Governance Lab and a professor in Technology, Culture, and Society here at the Tandon School of Engineering at NYU. And very delighted to be the host of this lecture series this year on the future of democracy. I think especially for those of us who are getting ready to vote in an election, we can agree that all of our attention is on this very question of what is the fate of our democracy. And we have heard in the past few weeks already from Audrey Tang, the Minister of Technology for Taiwan, and for Jeff Mulgan, former advisor to multiple prime ministers in the UK and CEO of Nesta, about what we can do, especially using new technology, data, and innovation, to begin to remedy some of the ills that we are suffering from in our democracy. What we can do to fix both the partisanship, the hyper-partisanship, and in our elections, and the dysfunction that so many people sense in our government that have led to not only the lowest rates of trust in government that we have ever experienced, but rates that are actually declining. A phenomenon that affects not only the United States, but countless countries around the world. So this lecture series is explicitly very hopeful. We are actually here with innovators, with thought leaders, with people to have a discussion about what we can do better and differently. And we invite all of you, please, to be part of what we hope will be a very energetic and interactive conversation. On behalf of Eric Kleinenberg, director here at IPK, the Institute for Public Knowledge, and Jessica Coffey, the associate director, Eric is off promoting his new book in the UK today, which he'll be talking to us about in November as part of our next installment of this lecture series. I also want to welcome you to their house, to our house, and we're very delighted that you could be here. So when Jeff was here a couple of weeks ago to speak to us, he read a quote from Alexander van der Monde, from about the middle of the 18th century, who wrote as follows: "Something has been said about the telegraph which appears perfectly right to me, and gives the right measure of its importance. Such invention might be enough to render democracy possible in its largest scale. Many respectable men, among them Jean-Jacques Rousseau, have thought that democracy was impossible without large constituencies. The invention of the telegraph is a novelty that Rousseau did not expect to happen. It enables long-distance communication at the same pace and clarity than that of the conversation in a living room." He brought that to us to remind us that beginning long ago, we have always been very hopeful about the possibilities for new technology and what they can do for democracy. So whether it was van der Monde in 18th century France, or whether it was Al Gore with his information superhighway another century later, or whether it's tonight, as we're hoping to hear from César Hidalgo and José Luis Martí, we are looking forward very much to talking about what are these possibilities, what are the ways in which we can adapt and adopt new technology to transform the world in which we live. So I'm eager to ask both of you this question and hope you will tell us the ways in which technologies, in which ways, what their pathway of diffusion will be, and what the interplay will be very much between technologies created by the private sector in many cases to the greatest held ideals of our public sector. To do this, we're not having one speaker tonight. We're having two speakers for a change to have a conversation, and two speakers who come from very, very different disciplines. José Martí is not the famous Cuban poet. He is, however, a political scientist and a legal theorist and vice rector at Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona. He's the author of Political Philosophy in Public Life and Legal Republicanism. And he joins in conversation today César Hidalgo, who is not Cristian Hidalgo, the soccer player, but César Hidalgo, the physicist, also a writer and an entrepreneur. He often plays an economist on TV. He's an associate professor at MIT, where he directs the collective learning group, and is also the founder of Data Wheel, which I'll let him tell you more about. He is the author of Why Information Grows and the Atlas of Economic Complexity. Again, a physicist and a political scientist, an economist and a legal theorist. We have two different disciplines, or multiple different disciplines, in conversation tonight. So what I also want to put to you is the ways in which your disciplines, coming from the perspectives that you tackle these problems, and I think you'll hear very different things from both of them, centered around a common set of questions. And we want to come ultimately to the question about what is the interplay between our different disciplinary approaches, how you can collaborate with one another, and how we might collaborate with one another to do a better job. So with that, I'll leave it to the two of you. We're going to have César present first, Jose present after, then we're going to hopefully engender some discussion, maybe even some fighting if we're lucky, and a lot of conversation. So, sorry, César.
Thank you. Thanks, Beth.
You want this?
We're going to take it like this.
Oh, then you can have that one.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and this is for the video. Okay, thanks, Beth. Yeah. So, first of all, I had a question, which is the future of democracy, like classical Greek architecture, is that supposed to be kind of like a contradiction? Is that the future that we want? You know, I see that there's some commentary there. You know, we have to think about. You know, because I'm actually talking about disciplines. I'm gonna come from a little bit of not even the discipline that I come or the one that I play on TV. I'm going to come from another discipline which is more like design and engineering, because what I'm going to be showing today is things that I learned by hanging out with groups of people that actually try to make things as an agent of change instead of saying things. And I didn't grow up in that academic tradition. I was a physicist doing things with data and equations and stuff like that. But when I joined MIT, I realized there was this other culture of people that were more like tinkerers. And within that context, I started working on a variety of tools that are starting to have impact in the way that governments operate and help us understand that there might be alternative paths to think about our democracy. So let's talk about democracy. So I'm going to say that there are 3 P's in democracy. You know, there's people, politicians, and public workers. Okay? So on the one hand, you have the people, that's us, the citizens. You know, some of us might become decision makers at some point, and we run for election, and we want other people to love us and to believe everything that we say. We become politicians. And then you have public workers that are the ones that have to do the things. And the reason why we have that description is because we believe that more or less the way that it works is across this cycle. Okay? So people elect the politicians then do executive action over the public workers then provide government service to the people. So we try to pedal the bicycle in that direction. Doesn't go that far. That's the problem. So then you have other loops or ways of connecting this. So some people focus on the legislative action. So okay, the politicians don't do executive action of what needs to be done, but they might provide rules on the people or on the public workers of how to act. And that might be another way to try to get the system running. But I'm not focused on the yellow or the light blue way. I'm going to focus on the green way. And basically what you have is that people also provide public workers directly with data through service, taxes, administrative records of many sorts. And the public workers actually do analytic work over that data to try to determine where they're going to do public investment projects, where they're going to do government spending, and all that boring stuff that happens on paperwork at governments, which actually does happen every day. And then these guys actually ask for permission to those guys, hey, can I do this project or not? There are budgets that get assigned, and eventually, there is a match there, and that's the government action that gets taken. And it goes through this path because they're making the suggestion of what to do. These guys are more like controlling and saying yes or no to the actions, but not sometimes coming up with the idea of where they're going to put the new sewer, which social housing are they going to build. Those things are too detailed for the politicians. So it goes that other way. And what I've been doing is saying like, okay, this bicycle, you can pedal it this way, you can pedal it that way, It's a very, very, very rusty chain, It's hard to move around. So I'm trying to make contributions to help on this loop, And these are contributions that integrate data and allow to distribute it to improve the analytic capacity of democracy. So the problem that I tried to solve, and this is something that I started in my lab but then grew into my company, is a problem that is very common, affects organizations in the public and private sector, and is that to inform decisions, you need data, but data is in multiple streams. And integrating those multiple streams of data is extremely costly, and is the one that limits the rate at which you can eventually come and do these reports or these analytical tasks. So if you think of a government, what you're going to have is, for instance, transportation data is going to be in the Department of Transportation, health data is in the hospitals, the health providers, the other authorities, economic data, you have customs data that tells you about exports and imports, you have social security data that might tell you about like the labor market of the country, you have income data in the tax authority, you have census, civil registry, demographic, and this data is not just in different databases in different formats. It's under the jurisdiction of different groups of people that sometimes don't know each other, don't know who in the other department would have that data, don't know what the stuff is being written on, and you have to integrate all of this. That's already, a very tough task, for anybody that would be assigned that job in the government. Then, you solve the integration challenge. But once you integrate the data, you can say, hey, I want to be able to have an API that gives me any custom combination of this data, no matter what department is coming in. That will be the distribution challenge. And then you will have an analytical challenge. Now that I can combine the data, I want to be able to analyze, I want to be able to run statistical tests, do visualizations, and all of that stuff. Eventually, automation challenge. You might have now signals being transformed into actions if you can construct all of the pipeline. Now, where are we right now? And I want to say that the state of the art, at least when it comes to public data tools, is filled with good intentions. Okay? So let's look at a few examples. Okay? So this is the open data side of Argentina. Okay? So you search for income, you find a few data sets, you click on one of them, you know, and what you're gonna get is a little file with a few numbers. You've gone through this frustrating experience yourself, I think, you know. And of course, you know, you go to another country that will be higher income, and you find the same stuff. So you start thinking, there's a big buzzing noise. Yeah, by the way, that's gonna get into the video. Yeah. Anyway, you find that it's not better, and you go to Switzerland and say, like, maybe the Swiss can do it. You know? But not even the Swiss can do it because they provide you the same thing. You know? They provide you a site with a bunch of links, you know, to like some poorly formatted Excel files, and ultimately what you're gonna get is something that is not a decision support tool. So to go from here to a decision, you know, it's not like going like from here to the Bronx. It's like going like from here to Japan. You know, it's like really far to go from a decision. Like the amount of man hours that you have to put for work and money and knowledge and training is immense. So I'm gonna say that we failed. The integration challenge, the solution challenge, the challenge, innovation challenge. This stuff is like, yeah, you tried the idea, but if the solution was not good, you didn't solve the problem. You kind of like gave it a shot, you know? And I'm gonna say that the reason why we made, you know, this problem, basically we failed to solve this problem, is because we thought of data as files. So we say, okay, what is a data set? Well, it's some numbers, the numbers go inside a table, so I have to give you the file that has that number inside that table. But because we did that, we eventually, you know, end up with websites that distribute these files, you know, and that's a really bad solution. So instead of thinking of data as little numbers that live inside a cell, what I'm gonna think of data as a fact that I can use to prove a point, to make a comparison, to look at a trend, you know? I'm gonna see it as an element not of a table, but of a story. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna integrate the data by creating tools that try to transform these data sets into story by combining visualizations and narrative that gets informed from the data. And if I'm able to pull that one off, I want to have integrated the data because in the stories, you don't know where something starts or where something ends. You know, the data sets are changing as the story continues to evolve. You know? Now, when you change the paradigm, you're going to change your software architecture. And what you're going to do is you're going to grab all of the data, you're going to put in a cube on that side, you know, you're going to integrate it, and what you're going to extract from that are entities that are expressed across multiple data sets. So you have data in the US, let's say New York is in multiple data sets. Or people between 25 and 34 might be in multiple data sets, you know? And that entity, you know, is gonna have variables that are gonna be associated in different data sets. So you basically build the stories around those entities that are being described by those variables, and that's how you integrate the data. And what you get are two bonuses out of that. The first bonus is that by transforming the data set into a story that is narrative, now search engines can actually find the data. Okay? So you have search engine optimize the data because Google doesn't know that cell C3 of that table in data.gov is the median household income of that place at that time. But when you give it a sense, the median household income of Oklahoma in 2016 was $47,315, Google understands. So when you bring the data to the surface of the web, you make it much more transparent and accessible so people can find it. The other stuff that you do is by integrating the data, you are building like an outlet, okay? So during the second industrial revolution, when electricity was developed, people basically had to build outlets so that you can put your refrigerator, you know, and have it run. The future is one in which AI and data are going to be this electricity and appliance type of interaction, and you have to build an outlet to connect AI to the data, and for that you're going to have to integrate all of the data and create those very expressive APIs that allows you, you know, to choose what are the variables that go in, whatever is going to come to explain, and so forth. So you're trying kind of like to make progress towards that goal too. Now, how do the tools look like? Okay, what actually have we built? So I'm going to give you a few examples. So if you go to Google and you search for the exports of Canada, Chile, United States, or whatever, the first organic link that you get is a link to the OEC. The OEC transformed all of the world's international trade data into interactive stories. It makes more than 20 million interactive visualizations. Okay? So it allows you to express all of this international trade data into the surface of the web. But that's a project that we did in 2011. You know, it's a project that now is like more than 7 years old. And it allows us to understand that there was a world in which creating these automatic forms of reporting, needed to grow, and we needed to develop the knowledge to figure out how to do it. So we started doing other projects that were much more ambitious in terms of what they were able to do. So in 2013, we created DataViva. DataViva integrated data. The OEC was only trade data. DataViva had data of exports and imports and employment and income and education for all of Brazil at a subnational level. Okay, this is 50 million people in the formal sector economy of Brazil, and they get expressed here, and we have a very analytical tool, for all of that information. In 2016, we created Data USA, and Data USA even expanded more in that ambition to integrate data. Not only economic data is included in Data USA, you have demographics, education, housing and living, health, insurances, all of the data that you're going to find on the ACS and on the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the county health rankings, and so forth. So it's a variety of data sets that get integrated here. 2017, we created Data Africa. Data Africa actually integrated data in this time of 13 different countries. So it's the first project that was, in some way, like transnational, but also it includes sub-national level resolution. And then on 2017, we also created Jobs KSA. This is a tool that looks at data for the entire Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This is Social Security or pension fund data. Pension fund data is a very rich source of data for labor economics. To kind of like try to understand, the occupations, industry, wage dynamics of people with different characteristics. And with that pension fund data, we construct all of these labor economics indicators for the Job Creation Commission of the Kingdom. And in 2018, we released Data Chile. This has been the most ambitious in terms of integrating data because it's more than 15 different government departments that are going into here. Now, does this idea work? Does this idea of search engine optimizing the data works? Well, and if you see the traffic of the OEC, over time the traffic grows. It goes down during the summer vacations and during Christmas, stuff like that. But it grows, because it's not fed by social media. It's not fed, by any referral, but by organic search. So we're answering a question, and now we have 500,000 monthly users there. If you look at Data USA, we reproduce the same behavior. So you launch, you get like a lot of press and everything. Oh, so pretty. Everybody knows your name. But like what you want is this side of the curve. Okay? You want a product that actually gets adopted. So this product gets adopted over time. And now we have more users. That's on April of last year. Now we have more than all that we had the moment that we launched. But these users are very different from those users. These users were following an article to New York Times. This one stayed there, for many minutes. They use the data to create, a variety of things because there's a lot of them. Actually, it's starting to affect the way that, like, the US is thinking of doing their sites. This is like the beautiful American Fact Finder. You might have used it at some point. That's how the US distributes census data. This is Data USA in 2016. This is what they're planning to do. I don't know when, for Trump's third term, maybe, who knows? So you have that one there, and it's a copy of Data USA. I take that as a win, because if they copy you, it means that they adopted your idea. Okay? So with that, we win the integration challenge, but there's still more to go on the ladder. So for the distribution challenge, actually, we're going to have something that is much more simple, which is the Data USA card. Okay? So this one we released in 2017, and what you do is you find a variable that you want, like median age, you add it to the card. And what you're going to be doing is every time you encounter a data set on Data USA, you can add it and merge it with other data sets by simply saying, put this on the card. The card is free. Okay? You can then download it, but it's the metaphor of like adding and integrating things into one unified, checkout system on the web. Now you go to Cook County, Illinois. We're going to search for data on health and safety, which is of course a different source. And when we add this data to the card, Data USA is going to do like that little magic of doing all of that integration and saving you what it would be to write a long Python code. So here you have it all got integrated, and now you solve that distribution challenge because anybody can go and say, I want this data set from this source, from that source, from that source, and the API is expressive enough that can give you that without any inner programming, so you have actually something there that you contributed. Now for the analytical challenge, then we created another tool. This is part of Kevin's thesis. So this is called Dive. You throw any data set into it, and what Dive does is integrates the pipeline of transforming data set into story. So you start recommending visualizations. You select the visualization that you like, you click on the variables that you're interested in, then you can go to make a regression table, you select what you want on the y-axis, what you want on the x-axis. It does all of the regression for you without having to type all of that code in R or Stata, and you can create a document. And we try to see if this analytical tool actually increased the analytic capacity of people. because the tool works if it makes people more efficient or better at certain tasks. So I want to give a trigger warning, because this is a social psychology experiment in which I try to find people with their guard down, because that's what you have to do in a social psychology experiment, because they cannot know what the experiment is, you know? So there's going to be, our part is going to be a little bit controversial. Tiny, just a tiny little bit, okay? So we did a randomized experiment with 70 subjects. These are professional data scientists from BCG and Deloitte, okay? So these are not students in college or stuff like that. These are guys that earn money, big bucks, you know, analyzing data for other companies on behalf of these two large consulting firms. And we gave them a data set from a hypothetical university, and they knew it was a hypothetical university, with salaries, experience, accomplishments, demographics of 1,000 university professors. But before they could open the data set and they could look at it, we asked them for questions, because we wanted to measure the probability that a person would get to the right posterior if they came with the wrong prior. Okay? So that's an outcome variable. So the question that we asked them is, do you expect a gender wage difference? And 90% of them said yes. They expected a wage difference that favored men. So what do you think we did? We created a data set that had a university that had a gender wage difference that favored women. So now they have to analyze the data, and the moment that they receive the data set, they get assigned randomly to one group, which uses Dive, or to a group that uses Excel. Okay, so these guys are mixed on a bunch of tables like you see there on the back, and in the same table there's a mixture of guys, and for 1 hour they have to do an exercise. Now at the end of the exercise we ask them, you know, did the data confirm or reject your hypothesis? You know, so the data rejected their hypothesis. They have to change the prior for the posterior. And when they use Excel, 57% of them got to the right answer. So, you know, it's nice because the guys are professional data scientists, is more than half, but also you can see the cup a little bit half empty. It's up to you, you know. But when they used Dive, it was way less half empty, because 80% of them got the right answer. So just by changing the tool that they had access, giving all else equals at RCP, you know, we find a difference, you know, and that's where it was published. So what's the pipeline that we're trying to build? And now here I'm going to be starting to go into my conclusion. So the pipeline that we're trying to build is one in which actually people will not have access just to like loose files with separate data sets they have to integrate, but one in which they can interact directly with all of the data that is available in public sources, using statistical tools, using visualization tools, using analytical tools. You know, and actually this is very useful to the public workers themselves. They're the ones that are more interested in this type of thing. So let's say you wanted to do something like, does commuting alone correlate with obesity? Today that would be very costly, would be like downloading data, writing Python scripts to merge it, all of that stuff. But here the pipeline would be much easier. You would grab obesity data, throw it in the pile. You know, you then grab, you know, commuting alone data, throw it in the pile. Then you want to put travel time, because maybe it's not just commuting alone, it's commuting long. So you want to put that as a control. Then you want to get poverty rate, and then you want to get median household income. So you want to have like some control variables too. And this is not to make a conclusion about obesity and commuting alone. It's to actually show how you can quickly get to a well-controlled regression, you know, from multiple sources of government data, you know, in seconds instead of weeks. You know, and how this is a big analytical capacity. So now you put this in there, you know, you go immediately to the regression table, you select adult obesity, you put the control variables here, you know, and the variables of interest, and you're gonna click, click, click. And after you click, 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 you find that, of course, it correlates with obesity in the previous year, but even controlling for all of the other factors, driving alone has a positive, you know, significant regression, and it's a quite hard square because it's a change, you know. So you actually get to that in a few seconds. And why are we doing this? Well, because we live in a world that is moving fastly towards automation, you know, but the automation discussion has been focused quite a bit on the units. Okay? This is a factory in Japan that manufactures solid-state drives. The entire factory is a robot. It's a completely sealed building where no people walks in. You know? But you have also the self-driving car, you know, which is a unit that like Google is planning to produce. You have another units that have been deployed but people don't know about, like the self-driving mining truck, you know, which actually operates in mines in Chile and in Australia. There are a lot of mines that are now autonomous, you know, but of course you don't see it on the streets of New York, you know. And you know, what we've been doing is also starting to think about how to create tools that can help, you know, manage not only, you know, the data, but also to help decisions about how to deploy investment capacity in governments and how to start thinking of an AI of systems. So this is a tool that we have been working with the government of Argentina and with IDB. And each point here, you know, is a census designated place. Is the smallest resolution that they have, you know, for for geography. So there's a very small population, so there's a lot of them, for instance, in Buenos Aires and so forth. And each circle, like the blue circles, are hospitals. Okay? And now that you see the hospitals, we calculate how many people have access to each one of these different hospital services in different parts of the country, depending on how far the hospitals are, how many beds they have, what complexity they can take care of, and everything. And you can actually find what are the populations that are underserved, with these public services. And this is something that the government honestly doesn't know. And in any part of the world, they don't know because they don't have that map. They just have like what they've heard when they shake hands with people. So like what they want to do next, the government itself is asking, is like, well, we want to have recommendations of where we could install more capacity, which hospitals we might want to expand, what if we translate this to schools they don't have the data, so we have much more aggregated thing. But we're creating this tool to help plan that public investment, with information about actually where the gaps are, which is something that in theory of public investment has always been there. You have to first measure the gap, then provide the public investment project. In practice, the gaps they were never able to measure. So this actually, they had household surveys that have like big mistakes sometimes. So this gives you a resolution, that is quite interesting. But when we think about AI, we think about governments and using AI in decision making. And when I'm talking about governments, could be governments in the context of democracy and nations, or it could be governments in the context of a company. We have to think about also how we think morally about these machines. So I'm going to leave you with this paper that came recently from a group from Brown, in which they do the trolley problem, the famous trolley problem that has been done a billion times, but they actually found a super interesting twist. The trolley comes in, you can pull the lever to deviate it, saving these 5 guys but killing that one. Do you pull the lever or not? But here, they're not asking you if you pull the lever. They tell you that someone pulled the lever, and either this or that happened. But that someone, was either a person or was an AI, was a robot. Okay? So you have a 2x2 matrix, yeah? You have like, did it take the action or not, or was it a robot or a person? And when you look at that 2x2 matrix, what you find is that humans get blamed, when they take the action. Okay? So they move the lever, they save those guys but kill that one, you're going to jail, buddy. If you are a machine, if you didn't pull the lever, you go to jail. Because you're judged as more morally wrong when they actually do the inaction in the case of the robot. Okay? So we actually, even in control situation, this is a control experiment, like the people that are answering one condition are not the same people that are answering the other condition. You find kind of like these discrepancies, and I think this is a place where there's a lot of like new research that's coming along, and that is interesting, and that gives us a little bit of food for thought, because maybe our intuitions as humans don't translate as easily as the intuitions that we want for machines. Thank you.
Hello everyone. I want to start by thanking Beth for inviting me to speak tonight here. And thank you all for coming, especially considering that today is a holiday. So I hope after this terrific talk, I hope that I will be able to bring some different ideas. That was always the plan for tonight, to contrast very different approaches, very different perspectives. What I will try to do is to move beyond all these contributions, which are fantastic. I'm also, as many of you are, I'm impressed about, the work that César and others are doing. I will try to move beyond that, and I will try to have a kind of deeper perspective. So I'm a philosopher and lawyer by training. What I do is basically democratic theory. That's my field. I'm interested in things like global democracy, deliberative democracy, participatory democracy, so-called digital democracy, so the application of technologies to democracy. So I'm interested basically about democracy, as you can see. And so tonight what I want to do is basically to, propose a kind of back to the basics. So I think that for the reasons that I will explain in a minute, I think we have to stop, we have to think, we have to reflect. It's time actually to take careful reflection about basically the directions that we want to take. That's what I want to share with all of you. So, as I said, don't expect too much fighting with César so far, because I agree with much of what he said, and I'm impressed about all these new technologies. As you will see, I will integrate part of what he has been saying, and I will actually make questions that go a little bit far beyond that. But I'm sure we will be able actually to have a conversation later, and I invite you all to jump in also to my presentation. I don't mind answering clarificatory questions or whatever you might want. Okay, so I came here basically to share with you one simple idea. So it's only one idea. I hope it's quite simple. You'll tell me, but it's one simple idea. I would say more. I would say it's actually a rather obvious idea, right? It's one idea only, and it's rather obvious. So that's the point at which Beth is probably wondering why she invited me to come here just to share an obvious, and simple idea. Well, you will see. Basically, I will try to make 4 claims that, in my view, emerge from that simple idea, but maybe some of you might actually disagree with me, right? So I think that some of these 4 claims might come to be controversial. If they are not, fantastic. So the only downside is that maybe what I will say is just boring for you. But I think that we might actually disagree, and we might have a fight later on about this. But in my view, as I said, everything comes from that simple idea. So I think that's what I will try to convince you about. And the idea is this. So my simple, rather obvious idea is that digital technologies, like the ones that César has been presenting, are transforming everything, right? Are changing our world entirely. They are changing it all. I mean, you've seen the kind of amazing things that we are already today able to do. So you can only imagine the kind of things that we can do next in the future, right? So all sort of science fiction books are coming to our minds, and people get a lot of fun just speculating about what kind of future we will find next. So the truth is that you all know that digital technologies are transforming it all. That I take it to be obvious. And I also take to be obvious that these technologies are just instrumental, right? They are just instrumental to our human final ends and values. I think, again, that's a simple idea, quite obvious. If not, we can engage in a discussion. Big warning here. Bless you. Big warning. This simple idea might be misunderstood, right? And I think there are at least 2 mistaken views, 2 mistaken readings of this simple idea. One of them might be even considered a silly view, right? Which are the following. So first of all, by just instrumental, I don't mean that technologies are unimportant or contingent or even worse, irrelevant, right? Actually, by saying that they are instrumental, that's another way of saying that they are relevant, right? So it would be silly to think that I'm saying this. So of course they are relevant, and of course they are important. I already said they are transforming it all. They are changing our world, right? So everything is going to be different. Everything is already different today. And they are not contingent. Well, in a way they are, right? So they are not necessary. It's not necessary that we came to have these technologies and not other technologies. That is contingent. So in that simple sense, they are contingent. But they are not contingent in a different sense, in a sense in which you might think, we have these technologies out there. We might choose using them or not, right? It's up to us. And, we don't need actually to use them if we don't want. In that sense, I think they are not contingent. They are necessary, right? So it's not up to us whether we have to use them or not. I think that we need to use them. We need them, right? They are necessary in that sense. And the second silly or mistaken view on my simple idea would be to believe that by just instrumental, what I mean is that the digital technologies are here just to help us doing exactly what we have been doing for centuries, all across the history of humankind. That they are here just to make things faster, easier, or more efficient, right? Much of what César has presented has to do with doing things faster, easier, and more efficient. And that's fine. I have nothing against this. I think, we will witness all sort of impressive results. We are already witnessing these results today, and we are going to be amazed much more in the future about this. So there's nothing wrong, of course, in getting things faster, easier, and more efficient. But I think digital technologies are here to change things in a much deeper way, and that's why I'm especially interested about this application of technologies. They will be able to provide very different ways to do things, and actually they will help us to do new things that we were not able to do before. And that's, for me, much more interesting. Okay, a bit of framework here. You may know this man. This is Howard Rheingold. He's a peculiar man, as you can see, right? He's always dressed in that funny way. He's one of the gurus of the tech industry, right? Of the technologies, digital technologies. He's been there from the beginning, and by the beginning I mean the 60s and 70s. His first books came out in the 80s. He wrote a book that was very largely influential in 1993 called Virtual Community. He helped us actually to think about the idea of virtual community. He was quite ahead of his time in presenting these ideas. And I strongly recommend two of his latest books. One of them is Smart Mobs. I think it came out in 2002, quite a long time ago in terms of the digital revolution, but still, I think, quite important today. And the latest book that I know is a book called Net Smart, from which I extract the following quote. This is in page number 1, right? So this is one of the ideas that he wants to start with. And he says, the ways people use new media in the first years of an emerging communication regime can influence the way those media end up being used and misused for decades to come. I think that's quite a sensible statement. And I think that what he says, referring, communication regime, I think we can actually extend it to any other technologies. So I think that we can say, following exactly this line of thought, we can say, we are at the beginning of a new era, right? So it's very difficult to exaggerate that view. I think that we all have this feeling that we are at the beginning of something really new that has to do with these digital transformations. And I think that, according to Howard Rheingold's perception, I think that the choices that we make today, the choices we have to make today, that is very critical that we make, they will have fundamental implications, consequences for the development of the main features that will characterize such new era. So I think one of the exciting factors, one of the exciting conditions of living this kind of change of era, or living at the beginning of a new era, is precisely that we have this power, this tremendous power of making critical choices that can have large impact in the future. We have to know that this is the reality that we live today, and we have to act responsibly, right? So with responsibility. So let me go to the point and to the 4 claims that I want to make, and let's see if we could disagree on something, or maybe we can discuss with Cesar also afterwards. The first claim. So at this stage of technology development, I think it's urgent and necessary that we achieve a clear understanding of what are the right human ends and values for which such technologies are instrumental. I think that simply follows from my simple initial idea, right? So technologies are instrumental to human ends and values, so we have to achieve a full understanding, a complete understanding of what these kind of human ends and values are, right? Why we want, what we want technologies for. And I would add, it's obvious that we need to work together in a cross-disciplinary way to make sure that we make the right critical choices. I think that's why it's so important that in evenings like today, people coming from the tech industry or people doing research on philosophy or democratic theory can have these conversations. I think sometimes it's not easy. All of you who have experienced the idea, you have a question?
Yes, if you can clarify what you mean by right. Is it morally right or feasibility?
I will come to this in a minute.
Thank
Yes, thank you for the question. I will come to this in a minute. But if you have experienced the possibility of working with people coming from different disciplines, you will probably know that that's a very difficult thing to do, right? Because we are all used to speak our own language. We are, in a way, prisoners of what we have learned within our respective disciplines, and transcending the borders of these disciplines is not an easy thing to do. But I think it's quite obvious that we need to do it at this moment, at this stage, more than ever. More framework here. Political philosophy, right? When we wonder what the right choices means, right? We need to come to normative theory, right? We need to come to political philosophy. That's what political philosophy has been trying to do for centuries or millennia, right? So I mean morally right to some extent, but basically, because here we are talking about democracy, I more specifically talk about politically morally right, about political morality. That's the kind of normative theory that I'm interested in. Now, if you ask what political philosophy can do for us in this kind of challenge, fundamental challenge that we face, the first thing you have to notice is that political philosophy has divided into two different realms. So there are two questions, or two different theories, if you want, within the field of political philosophy. One is justice, and the other is legitimacy. And it's crucial to understand this distinction. Let me put it, as always, philosophers complicate things, right? So there are thousands of ways in which I might complicate the distinction between justice and legitimacy. I see some philosophers here in the room. We might disagree about this or discuss about this for actually literally centuries or millennia. But the thing is, let me take things as simple as I can. And so the simplest way to put this distinction is the following. Justice, the theory of justice, is a response, tries to respond the question of what decisions, from a substantive point of view, what decisions should be made? What right choices should we make at this moment, right? That's a question for the theory of justice. Legitimacy focuses on a different kind of question. Legitimacy focuses on who and how should make such choices, such decisions. As you can see, these are two different questions, right? And these two different questions require two different sets of answers, two different kinds of theorizing. That's what the theory of justice and the theory of legitimacy try to do respectively. Now, there are two reasons why we should care about legitimacy. I take it to be obvious why we should care about justice, right? So we all want to live in a just world. If you don't, we can actually discuss later, but I think that we all agree on this. So I take it to be quite obvious why we should care about justice, about the question of what are the right choices to make. Maybe it's not so obvious why we should care about legitimacy. And let me give you two reasons. So the first one, which is very common in political philosophy, is the sheer fact, the mere fact that we happen to disagree about what justice is or what justice requires. We disagree. We have different views. We have different theories about what is correct. So it's not easy actually to achieve consensus about what should we make. And still, we need some kind of rules of the game in his terms. So that's what democracy is all about providing some kind of rules of the game that can, adjudicate on the fact of disagreement, on the fact that people disagree about what should be done. The second reason I want to give you is that even if we happen to agree on what justice requires, right? Even if we all share the same sense of what justice is and what kind of right decisions should be made, we still care about who makes such decisions and how this person or people make such decisions. So at this point we might wonder, okay, what about the hypothesis of the benevolent dictator, right? So philosophers have been struggling with this hypothesis for centuries. So the guy in the picture is, any idea? Plato, thank you. Not Aristotle, it might be, it could be, actually nobody knows how Plato and Aristotle look like. But this is supposed to be Plato. And, as you may know, Plato, one of his views was that we should actually rely on experts. We should rely on the wiser. We should rely on those who know to make the decisions that we need to make. we should rely on philosophers, and that's, you know, being himself a philosopher is a little bit suspicious, but that was his point, right? We should rely on philosophers. So what about the hypothesis? Across history, it has only been a hypothesis. I don't know any concrete example of a benevolent dictator. If you know some, I would be willing to learn about it. But let's figure out what would happen if we find a benevolent dictator. Or let's run some kind of science fiction here. What if we could find a technology that would be able to make the right decisions on our behalf, right? So imagine that hypothesis. What about this? Should we rely on this benevolent dictator? Okay, I think we shouldn't, right? And the reason is the reason I gave you, that we should always care about who and how are making these decisions. Let me go for the best case scenario for the hypothesis of the benevolent dictator, right? Imagine this mother caring, loving her child, and so imagine this mother is a very capable person, is fully informed, she knows all what she needs to know to make decisions on behalf of her child. She loves her child, and she's willing to make all the decisions that it would promote the interest of the child, right? That would be like the perfect scenario for the benevolent dictator hypothesis. Still, those of you who have teenagers as children, you may know that at some point, right, there is a clash in who is making decisions, the way in which those decisions are made, etc. There's a clash between parents and teenagers. I have an 11-year-old son, which is a preteen, and we are already clashing on this, right? So at some point there is a clash, and this clash is absolutely reasonable to happen, to emerge, because at the point at which children become teenagers, their autonomy develop, and even if they don't have any reason to doubt that we are, you know, good-intentioned, well-intentioned, that we want to make the best decisions for them, that we know probably better than they do about what they need and what is in their interest, etc., still they want to be the ones making the decisions regarding their lives, and they are right on that. The reason has to do with autonomy, right? And that's important because that tells us something about democracy. Let me go to my claim too. In democracy, we care about democracy as the only way of making political decisions legitimate because we care about two fundamental human values, right? So if the question is, what are the political or human ends and values that we should care about? Well, there are two if we are concerned with democracy. These are the values of autonomy and the value of political equality. Democracy was defined famously by Lincoln as the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. An ideal of political legitimacy based on the values of autonomy and political equality leads us to conclude that it has to be us, those who rule, those who govern, right? So it's the government by the people. It needs to be us. And I think this brings us to a corollary of what I've been saying so far, which is that digital technologies must be instrumental to those values, right? The values of autonomy, individual autonomy, and political equality. But second warning, let me go to a second warning. There's a wrong view about democracy. There are many wrong views about democracy, I guess, but there's one that I think we should leave aside as soon as possible. And that's the view that, according to which democracy is the government by the people, but only by, meaning by that, the government by the people's whims or by the people's uninformed opinions or uninformed judgments or desires or inclinations, right? So that democracy is just about letting the people decide even if they are uninformed or even if, you know, they are whimsy, etc. So I think that's a wrong view of democracy. We should not conflate this with the genuine meaning or the genuine view of democracy, the one I will define in a second. So the idea of self-government requires the condition of individual and collective autonomy to develop. I think that's very important. And again, when we say that technologies should be instrumental to the ends and values that we believe in, I think that we should be very careful about making them instrumental about these kind of conditions. So let me make a claim number 2++. Just adding some information. I will not go in detail to these principles, but I think that, so the theory of democracy that I find more correct is one that we might define as participatory, deliberative, and collaborative. And I think that that view of democracy might be understood on the basis of 5 principles. And you don't need to agree with me on that, because actually we disagree about what's the best view of democracy, and that's fine. But in any case, I just give these 5 principles as an example that if we believe that that's the kind of principles that we should promote when we care about democracy, then we should design the technologies, we should make the critical choices that I was mentioning before. We should make them in a way that actually help us to promote those principles. I think that's the critical stance here. Even more framework, I'm coming to an end, don't worry. A little bit more framework for what I want to say. I think Cesar referred to this briefly in his talk. I think we are also living in a time of something that we might call the revolution of collective intelligence. I think that we are beginning to understand more and better how different mechanisms of social psychology and social behavior work and make it possible for collective intelligence to arise, to emerge, and to work. I think, what we are now understanding about collective intelligence is really crucial to the way in which we should think about the future of democracy, as I will claim in a minute. So some of the slides are cut here, I'm sorry. But so again, as a way of example, I will not explain all these principles because for reasons of time, we can come back to these over discussion if you want. But as a way of example, one might give an account of collective intelligence on the basis of these 4 different sources, different powers that group agents may develop. The power, or the so-called miracle of aggregation, the power of deliberation, the power of collaboration, and the power of adaptation. It would be way too long actually to explain them in detail. I will not do it, as I said, but I give you this just as an example of the kind of thinking, the kind of ideas that you can expect from democratic theory working together with social psychology and with social theory and so on. And I think that's, again, crucial to understand what kind of democracy we should aspire to, right? So again, about the values and aims that we should pursue. Let me go to my claim 3. I said I have 4 claims. I will go faster, and let me finish as soon as possible. My claim 3 is the following. Because they are fundamentally technologies, these technologies that we are talking about, they are fundamentally technologies of information and communication, most of them based on data and data analysis and data, the kind of data stories that Cesar has been talking about. These digital technologies have a crucial role, right? A crucial role in supporting and empowering these kind of mechanisms and sources of collective intelligence. So I'm sure that even if I didn't say anything about the 4 powers, I'm sure that all of you have some kind of vague idea about what collective intelligence is, because this is one of the fashionable concepts that you can hear here and there. So if you haven't heard about it, we can again talk later. But in any case, let me just say, accept it as an assumption that these technologies have a great role to play in fostering and promoting these kind of things, right? So technologies that we all have heard about it, right? Like artificial intelligence, blockchain, virtual reality, machine learning, data analysis, etc. So these digital technologies are necessary, as I said before, not contingent in the second sense I expressed, to help us change democracy and to let it evolve into something new, a new form of governance. And these technologies are crucial also to provide the kind of adequate responses we need to face a radically new world and a radically new and enormous set of challenges. I think that's, probably the most important part of what I wanted to say today. I think that we are actually, as I said before, at the beginning of a new era that comes with very different challenges. And in that sense, we need technologies to help us thrive with these new challenges and to, change the way in which we have been thinking about democracy. So I think we need to find new forms of governance, desperately need, right? Let me just say very quickly, in order to face that challenge, we need 4 kind of things. We need more innovation and experimentation, and in that sense, people like Cesar are doing fundamental things for our democracies. We need to experiment on a very diverse set of levels, but one of them is certainly data. We need also cross-disciplinary work, as I said before. We need long-term vision, and we also need a full awareness and understanding of the ends and values that we should pursue. That's why I started saying that we need some kind of back to the basics, right? Let's go to rethink the most fundamental values that brought us to endorse democracy across history of humankind. And as a way of last framework that I wanted to share with you, we all know about many of these challenges that we face, right? So we face challenges, for instance, about how to secure freedom and privacy in a world in which is increasingly determined by the internet and by our mobile phones and the data that we generate. We know about scandals like Cambridge Analytica scandal, how the use they have been doing of some data, right, for political manipulation. We know the risk of undemocratic powers, external undemocratic powers intervening in our elections, in our democracies. We also have all learned about how countries like China are running very sophisticated programs of surveillance of their population, and the tremendous challenges that these imply for those citizens. But why assuming that China is just making surveillance over their own citizens? Why we should assume that? Why not simply assume that China is also accumulating data from people from different countries? We all know also about the challenges that we face from the fact that 5 companies are accumulating an unprecedented amount of private power. That is also a challenge. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm just saying that that is a challenge that we have to face, that it has to do with something that César also referred to, which is whether we should expect these experimentation and research to emerge from the private sector or from the public sector. We also face a world in which you can hear, well, you probably don't see exactly which names, which countries you have here listed in this chart, in this table, but so in red, what you have is private corporations from different sectors, and in black, you have countries. And this list compares countries' GDPs with corporations' revenues.
That's what in the US is not 3 trillion, it's like
2014.
The federal budget is like 3.5 trillion, which will be matching that. So those are revenue and therefore the budgets. Yeah.
2014.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, the budget, right. No, thank you. Yeah, so it's a budget of these countries compared with the revenues of these companies. Thank you. Exactly. So, and as you can see, many companies are, they are much bigger than most countries in the world. So we live in a world that is, global in a way, very deeply digitalized, but is also a world in which private powers are, accumulating a lot of, power and wealth in unprecedented ways. And we also know about, challenges about artificial intelligence, and this is so far science fiction, but, many people care about the possibility that this artificial intelligence at some point might escape from our control. And now I come to my 4th and final claim, and I will stop in a few seconds. I think we need technology to support and enhance our collective intelligence. That's the main thing I came here to share with you. We need technology also to defend ourselves from the threats and the obstacles and enemies of democracy, and I've mentioned some of them. But more importantly, we need technology to serve us, right? Not to replace us. I think that's something really, really important to keep in mind, right? Again, this refers to my original simple idea. Technology is just instrumental, right? What we should care about is about the ends and the values that we endorse. Technology is here to make fundamental transformations and revolutions, and we will continue witnessing impressive things, but we need to make a set of decisions right now about how to orient the research that we have on these technologies to serve the purposes, the values that we praise and endorse. One idea, among many others, one way of trying to do that is what Beth actually is trying to promote from the GovLab, is this idea of crowd law, which I totally believe in, and I'm happy to contribute also too. This is a fantastic project on how technology can be used to bring collective intelligence to public decision making in ways that also are quite close to the thing that Cesar was saying. What we should avoid at any rate is things like this, right? This is actually an ironic title, but so this is an article about how China is using data actually to avoid the question of why democracy is a valuable thing. That's the kind of wrong perspective. We should try to avoid this. And I will finish with a final quote. This is another guru of the technology sector, Jaron Lanier. He's written many books. The latest book that came out this year is called 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Account Right Now. It's a book that I strongly recommend you, even if you finally don't do what he's asking for and you don't delete your social media account. But I think that it comes with a lot of interesting arguments. And he says in the book that what we call artificial intelligence, we might apply this to any kind of other technologies, but he here is talking about artificial intelligence. What we call artificial intelligence should never be understood as an alternative to people, but instead as a mislabeled new channel of value between real people, right? I think that's the main view that I try to share with you, this rather obvious idea. Sorry if I talk too long, but in any case, I think that we have a fundamental, tremendous challenge in front of us, and that's in moments like this, in which we are changing of the forms in which we organize ourselves politically and socially and so on, is precisely in times like this when it's more fundamental than ever that we go to the deeper questions. I think that's why philosophy might be useful, and that's also why I came today here to try to share these ideas with you. Thank you.
Let me invite both of you to come up. For those people who are watching on the live stream and online, please feel free to tweet any questions to #IPK. Again, #IPK for those of you in the room. We're going to get to your questions in just one moment. I want to ask the first one and then invite you to also respond to one another as you would like. So Jose's last slide was, who needs democracy when you have data? So that seems like an obvious provocation to you, if I may put it that way, for excitement purposes.
Yeah, you can put it that way. I would disagree.
That's the goal for you to disagree. Not to say that anyone doesn't love lots of data that creates the kind of efficient government that you're talking about that would actually work for a change. The question is, you spending all of your time and energy on data and not spending it on democracy, according to Jose.
Okay. I think there's no disagreement. There's more of a misconception. So, today, I think we celebrate something else too. You guys are at NYU, and Paul Romer won the Nobel Prize. So, congratulations to you guys. And what Paul Romer did was, he created a model of economic growth in which, knowledge was endogenous. And the first thing that you say in the presentation, basically, I know that you're coming from a different tradition, from that of philosophy and democracy theory, but basically that's verbatim to the neoclassical economic growth theory. Maybe I don't know if you are neoclassical or not, but actually, philosophically, you are, because you're saying that people have the ability to create some things which are digital technology, were instrumental to create the outcomes. That's the production function Y equal AKL, the old production function of macroeconomics. And that production function comes from there not because we have chosen things to be instrumental, but because a hammer is always going to be instrumental and digital technology is also going to be instrumental. So then you go into the rest of the presentation and you try to argue that we should morally choose that they should be instrumental. But in reality, if you would come from the economic theory, you cannot have capital be anything other than capital. So they have to be instrumental, so that is already baked in to the nature and the fabric of reality. So in that context, there cannot be a contradiction. There cannot be a conflict here, because that the technology by definition has to be instrumental. By construction, it's capital. It's not labor. Yeah. So if it has to be like that, then the question is now, when you're having data as a form of participation, it's not that you are denying that humanity. You're having a different channel of communication. So one could be let's go to a rally, let's express our views, and I want to be, let's communicate in social media. But also, data is a form of communicating to the people that run the stuff. So the question is, there's no contradiction. What you're saying is that there are different ways of doing the how part of the question, but this is never going to be something that is not instrumental, because capital cannot be anything other than capital.
Yeah, well, I'm not. Yes, I'm not an economist, but so I would resist responding to the question whether I sympathize with neoclassic approaches or not. But so what I was trying to say is actually, so my four claims are not arguments to say that technology is instrumental. I started assuming that it is instrumental. I think that we agree on that, and I think that's pretty.
But when you get to point two, you kind of like deduce that it should be.
No. I'm not saying it should be. What I'm saying is, if it's instrumental for certain purposes. Then, so what philosophy or democratic theory is supposed to provide is actually a discussion about what these ends or values or purposes should be, right? And here, what I try to say is, there are two questions that are relevant. One is the question of which exact purposes or values we should care about. And that's a question for justice. But there's also the question of who and how should make decisions about which values should be the values that we pursue. And this is the fundamental question for legitimacy. So I guess what I'm saying is, we should care about democracy. We should care about being ourselves, being us, the ones who govern, right? Even in the hypothesis that we might end up finding a way in which someone else, let's say, artificial intelligence or any other technology, might, make decisions that might look like, more efficient, more effective, even more just. Right? That's fine. If we find this, that would be terrific. But still, in that circumstance, we should care about being being ourselves, the ones who govern, right? The ones who make our decisions.
But you cannot stop, because like that system that is making the decisions, no matter what it is going to have to be fed some input that is going to originate from humans.
Absolutely.
And that's why it can only be instrumental. It can never be a replacement.
Absolutely. But then, so that my worry there, and maybe at that point I was going too fast, but my worry is we should try to resist the idea that democracy is basically about knowing what people think or knowing what people desire or what people are inclined to, right? As you could get when you analyze the data that people are pouring in their social interactions or in internet interactions. So democracy is not a way of having a permanent polling, right? A permanent poll on what people think or are inclined to think about certain issues. It's not about this. Democracy, or the value that we find in democracy, has to do with the fact that people have the chance actually to engage in some kind of meaningful public deliberation. And then this presupposes that the people need the kind of relevant information and data first. And that's why technologies that, like the ones that you are developing, are crucial, right? So I think that's fantastic for the kind of view I'm defending. But the thing is, with this data, what we need is the people to engage in some kind of discussion to increase their awareness of what is relevant and the kind of values that they need to pursue, right? So we can never replace that final step.
And I agree, and that's why I would disagree with your first point.
Okay.
Because your first point is that we need to, and you use categorical claims of, we need to know completely the set of moral values and choices that we have to do as we enter the technology. And I would say, no, we have to keep on learning, because we're never going to have an exhaustive understanding, and we're not going to have it on 2019 either. So in that context, I would agree with you, but by agreeing with you, I would disagree with your point one, because it was kind of like that you have to know it all in advance. And I said, no. You're never going to know it all in advance, and as technology unfolds, you're going to have to keep on learning, and you have to kind of like keep on including all of these different feedbacks that include people and technology and communication channels into the learning outcome. And that's the outcome that you want to keep on having, and that's why you want to introduce
So you basically agree and disagree with me, and I will also agree and disagree with you. So what I think is that you're right. You're right that we cannot wait to have a full understanding of the values and ends that we should pursue before doing anything else. You're right on this. I mean, I totally agree with that. Because I'm skeptic about the possibility
knowledge is not exhaustive.
Right.
Exactly, yeah.
But we are actually going around the same values, all across the history of humankind. It's not that the values are so diverse. So we disagree about the exact ways of conceptualizing the values. We have made, actually, by the way, we have made quite substantial progress in the way we understand those values.
But the values do change quite a bit if you look at like all of these different surveys and data that people take about how people thought about the world and society in the 1950s and 60s and 70s. They're like huge trends and swings. So there are like actually big movements, at least in the last century for sure.
It all depends on what you mean by values. What I'm talking here about is basically about underlying fundamental values, right? Values like autonomy and political equality. And it has always been about these values, right? So if you read, that's why, I mean, in a way, if you read philosophy, it's sort of depressing, you know, read Plato and Aristotle, because you realize that they are discussing about the same things that we are discussing today. So there's a skeptic or pessimistic interpretation of that fact. Something like, you know, philosophers are useless or they are dumb because they don't provide solutions to the problems that we have. But I think, I mean, there's another more positive reading of what I was said. So, and this is basically that we are all the time discussing about the same values. It's always about the same values.
But the fact that philosophers in the past had, you know, agreements with philosophers in the present doesn't mean that the general population in the past had agreements with the general population in the present. Because in some way, among the intellectuals, you might find certain truths that get accepted and get transmitted in those elites.
Absolutely.
But the general population varies much more.
I agree.
In how they think of each
I
other.
agree. I would say more. I think that we have actually, you know, I'm quoting here a philosopher called Peter Singer. I think that moralities can be seen like an expanding circle, right? So we have made progress. So nobody would defend slavery today or would defend, you know, male domination over women. I mean, some people would defend it, but not with good arguments, right? So nobody is actually having a good theory about this. So I think we are making progress, right? But it's making progress in understanding the values that have been there for ages, right? So, but again, what is fundamental about democracy is not presupposing any substantive value. So my point was not that we should presuppose any particular understanding of these values. My point is that we should, for the reasons that I specified when I introduced the idea of legitimacy, my point is that we should leave the last word, the last decision on which are the values that we should promote to the people.
Of course, because that's the only way that's going to keep on changing and learning. If you think about it, one disaster of time travel would be, like, let me finish this with a little joke. So imagine like this sci-fi movie in which, you know, like people that commit crimes get judged in different time periods. So you put them on a judge machine, on a time machine, and they go to like a judge of like the 1600s, and then you say like, you had sex with your boyfriend, she's killed, you know, like it would be like mayhem, you know. So in some way, the only way to keep it learning is to understand that the people are changing in their values, and you have to keep on including them, so they will give you the present version of the values, like which sometimes can move super fast in periods of even 20, 30 years.
I'm only going to, I hardly want to interrupt this debate, but I think we have lots of people who want to ask these questions. So roving Mike, I would suggest should we take 2 or 3?
Sure.
That's okay with you? Okay. You want to do the honors? We have one over here, and then one over here, one over here, one over there, and then one over there.
Thank you first of all for the brilliant statements that you made. It was really enriching. My point goes a bit to what César was saying, and that's a deep worry that I'm carrying, because I agree with you, yes, intellectual collective autonomy and all of that, but I feel if we are not able as citizens and as institutions to unlearn and to really question the values that we have, our systems are deeply corrupted, they don't work, and I think we're just duplicating the mistakes that we've been doing, and we don't have the time. We see the election in Brazil just yesterday, so I wonder, I'm very pessimistic because I don't see the readiness of our institutions to invite us to unlearn as citizens and to be autonomous and then make the right decisions and all of that.
So that's a question to me?
Wait, no, hold on. Don't answer.
Jessica.
Hi, my name is Natasha Iskander. I'm a faculty here at NYU. I have 2 related questions for both of you. The first is that your data solution, your technology is really to narrate a story. And that's very powerful. But your story relies very heavily on data, and that's the power and also the Achilles heel of your narrative strategy, right? Because data collection is highly political, and what we consider data is also highly political. So do you put a citizenship question on the census, or do you count unpaid women's work as income? All of these are political decisions, and I wonder how your strategy negotiates those political decisions and your role in shaping the values that structure how we decide what is data and what is not data, and who gets to make those decisions. And a related question for you, Jose, is you talk about the importance of autonomy and control over data, and you talk about it in the public square. really this is the democratic space. But I think there's a real tension over this, with this supposition or this statement, and the value of autonomy and data in the context of work and production. Specifically, the fact that data, personal information, is a source of value for people other than the people who are producing the data, right, big companies, and that worker autonomy, especially with the automation of processes, is also something that's come into question. And I think there's a real tension there, and I think, not to sound Marxist, but I think you need to actually engage. I wonder how you might engage with that tension, because one without the other seems that it starts to fall flat.
Oh, maybe a third.
We're writing down so we remember.
Hi, I'm here. Okay. Hi. One question for César, relating to what Natasha just said about, could you talk a bit more about your thoughts on data collection practices and also qualitative data, because you're sort of reverse engineering the whole thing. You're quantifying stories to tell the story, whereas ethnographers have told stories for many, many decades. The second question is for José, about the role of philosophy in defining ethical principles for artificial intelligence practices that increasingly inform policymaking globally, and the tradition of philosophy as being a white male domain until this day. And third question, what do you think about tech savviness, both of you? What role does it play? Tech savviness.
Okay, do we get started?
Oh, yes.
Okay, we'll start with Jessica. So I understand that you have like a deep worry, and you were following the elections in Brazil, and I know a lot of people share your concerns and fears, and that's okay. Like life is not always about being happy, and it would suck maybe if it were, So, but I agree with you that there is a need to unlearn. I think like one of the reasons that we're in is because like democracy. I agree in the large theory, but when it comes to the how, there's a large design space, and we explore super little of that design space. Basically, it's like politicians, newspapers, like people, bickering, like vote every 2 years. Like a very small part of the design space gets explored, and I think that part is like worn out, and now people are into their ways, and when there is more hatred among groups of people and everything, they also like fail to see each other. Here, according to psychology, when people hate each other, they basically justify any means to reach the end, and you cross kind of like that moral line, which is a dangerous thing. And for example, in the US, the hatred for the opposition party went up from like 17% to like 50%, so it's like pretty high, and it went quite a bit over the last like 5-6 years mostly, so there is a part that we will need to unlearn, because if there's no forgiveness, if there's no love, if there's not kind of like thinking that that person is also coming from a place, of love or that might be relatable to you, we're never gonna, like heal this at any decent rate, So I agree that there's a lot of unlearning that we would need to do. That would be my answer to your question.
On this question, I would agree with that. I think, so the first thing I want to say is that I'm not so pessimistic. I think that if you take the big picture, right, things are, improving for democracy, even if we are, we seem to be in front of some kind of backlash, right? Definitely in certain countries. But I think if you take the big picture, things are improving. So if you analyze carefully how democracy was looking like 50 years ago, it's not that it was much better, right? So maybe the leaders were better in some respects, but it's not that the people were better informed, or that the people were, had better values at any rate. So it's not actually that things have been declining or degrading in that sense. I think, by the contrary, I think the conditions are given for democracy to evolve and improve. And I think that we are dissatisfied with many positions in many elections, precisely because we are more demanding than ever, which is for me a sign that things are going in the right direction. So that's what I would say to this first question.
Thank you. I'm going to continue with Natasha's question about the data. And yes, data is political, depending on what type of data, but the other one that is kind of administrative. So if it comes to like like income, for instance, of women that are working at home, I agree, you can decide whether you count it or not, and and a lot of surveys, of course, have a lot of decisions. But when you look at like the custom records, the only part political there is, hey, am I trying to buy like dollar credits from the central bank to launder money? But otherwise, it's administrative records,
No, Cesar, I wouldn't agree with
You would agree that like the custom records?
I would tell you that is probably also deeply political in ways that are not so visible or intelligible to the general public, and that these minutiae come up in trade negotiations in a really profound way. So I'm not sure I would agree with you on that.
So you wouldn't agree that when like the Port Elizabeth in New Jersey tells you that they sold a certain amount of soybeans that went to China on a boat, that number it was chosen politically and it wasn't part of like a commercial transaction between two companies and it's an administrative record?
I'm not saying that it was chosen politically, but the way that we tally products,
Yeah.
the way that we determine what their value is and the tariffs that will be levied and how they move, all of this stuff is highly political and it depends.
The
very
tariffs for sure change, but that doesn't change what goes through customs or not. It might change how much you're exporting or something or not, but doesn't change like what the custom is measuring. So like you have to understand data always on the narrow context of which is collected. So if you think that a tax record is telling you about something of how people talk in Geneva, that's a big disconnect. It's telling you about like how much was that shipment valued at a market price FOB when it went to another country, and in the import side they get it CIF.
I mean, we can have a longer debate about this. But
When
this
you
is
have
how
like, for
it's
example, your mobile phone record and you have a call, and I know that you registered a call at this building at this time and everything, that company is saving that data because it goes for your billing, goes for the usage, it goes for all of those type of things. I've used those type of records, but I would make a big distinction between that record and a survey in which I am choosing the questions as a researcher of what goes in and what goes out, And there's a whole range of data sets, that exist out there. So yes, there is some cases that it can be very political and you can have a big choice of what is being collected. In other cases, that is way on the other part of the dial, If you do think that the two things are identical, then, we can talk a little bit about like how like this process goes. But I don't think they're identical. I think like the dial actually is quite wide between, like what generates an administrative record and, for example, what I generate on a survey or when I run an experiment. When I run an experiment, I exactly know what I want to get. So that would be my answer there.
And so my answer to Natasha's question, so first of all, I would say that I would rather agree with Natasha on how
Generalization?
how some data is collected or what some selection of data has a political dimension. I think that's for me that's obvious. I agree that there are many tensions, actually, not only the one that you pointed out. There are many tensions out there. I think that what I would say in reaction to what you said is, Marx, you said that you didn't want to go Marxist, but why not? I mean, Marx did a fantastic job, in capturing some basic features of the kind of industrial society in which he lived, right? So in a way, so part of what I was trying to say is that, I mean, it's common knowledge, everyone knows, we are moving towards a different kind of society. And we need our Marxists, future Marxists, to be born and emerge and produce their works. And there will be all sort of tensions. I agree with you that some of them might come from the fact that, from the work area, and I agree with the question that you made, and that the tensions are there. But still, for this kind of new era that we are approaching, I think that the most relevant decisions that need to be taken by the public. And so the public need to find the time and the interest and the information and the motivation actually to handle all those decisions. Because that's, what we have learned from democracy. I think that, that's the most fundamental lesson that is there from ancient Greece. And in ancient Greece, they understood it in many mistaken ways, right? First of all, excluding women, which will make a connection with the last question. But we have improved a lot in our understanding of this idea of democracy, but still, the answer has to be a democratic answer. So I think that even despite the fact that there will be many tensions there, I think we need to find the time to provide a democratic answer. Maybe, if you don't mind, maybe I can connect. What was your question? Your name? What was your name? Mona. So let me just address Mona's question, and then you can go from there. So I agree with you. I mean, philosophy has been dominated by white male, and you probably, can notice this on several respects. I think that fortunately, Today we can speak about the influence of feminist philosophy, which is huge, and I think that this is changing. But of course, if you study the history of philosophy, the main conclusion is that it has been always about wives.
Sorry,
Yeah, sure.
some data.
Yeah.
Actually, in 2011, in 51 graduate programs in the U.S., 10 years or women track professors in the U.S., that was 21% were women.
Yeah.
So that's continuing that trend. And as, for example, supranational institutions like the European Union really turn to philosophy and philosophers. Those people that sit on these committees are the same ones that sat in Greece 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So what do we do when we talk about equality and artificial intelligence and philosophy?
But the thing is, you probably agree with me that the situation of women is much better today than it was in ancient Greece. I'm not saying, of course, you're right. You're right not only about U.S. universities, it's exactly the same in Spain. As Beth said, I'm vice rector of my university, and I know the numbers are more or less similar to that. So we have a problem with that, and that's obvious, right? We need to deal with that problem. But still, it's good news that today nobody would say in public, that men should dominate women, right? So that's something that I guess that nobody sensible would say today with a good argument. And I think, that's an improvement. But again, so my point was that whatever decision we make about values and whatever decision we make about how we design the technologies that will be instrumental for those values, those decisions need to be, democratically made. And of course that includes women. What we need to work about is about empowering women to, let them have their own voice. I agree entirely with you that there are all sorts of deficits at this respect. That's obvious. And it's urgent, actually, that we provide solutions for that. And so in connection to this, I think that something that might be interesting, César mentioned the trolley problem. So in moral philosophy, there has been, basically in the theory of justice, there has been a fundamental division between utilitarianism, right, and the so-called deontologism. So the solution to the trolley problem that is intuitive for many people is a utilitarian solution. We should compare numbers, right? And it's always better to save the life of one person, to save the life of, it's always better to save 5 people than saving only one person, right? It's just about weighting the numbers that we have in each side of the balance. That's the utilitarian approach. But there's a huge school of thought, totally different to that, which is the ontologism, right? So many people claim that many of the experiments that are being run on the development of technologies, they are done under the assumption that the right philosophy is the utilitarian one. And some feminists have actually disagreed with that by saying that this is the typical masculine or male perspective on philosophy, something that you can reduce to numbers, to abstract thinking, and things like this. So it's super relevant that we take into account, the challenges that this feminist philosophy is also putting on the table. We should not just proceed on super basic assumptions like, the ones behind the trolley problems. So I think you're totally right. I couldn't agree more with you that we should welcome all these new perspectives, and we still face huge imbalances and deficits in terms of gender equality, of course.
And Mona, thank you for your question. So I love ethnography. I'm actually a big consumer of ethnography, and I read and follow the work of a lot of anthropologists, especially like cultural anthropologists like Joe Henry and so forth. But at the end of the day, I think actually, it comes to something that when it comes to make these tools for data, like the one that we're doing in Argentina and that I show at the end of the presentation, it's a little bit much simpler because you need to be able to solve a problem for public workers that have very little money, very little time, very little capacity. So they would come to you and say hey, I have 8 months, I have to figure out how to better do public investment in health in Argentina. I have $120,000 and I have a team of 2 people, Guido and Maria Rocio. What can I do? And I cannot say, let's hire 35,000 ethnographers and go to every hospital, because with 120K, it just doesn't do the math, the math would not work. So in that context, you're kind of trying to solve many times, working with these guys in problems that even challenging for you for the budget and for the time and for the capacity that you have and for the capacity that they have, and you have to operate at a different scale. So if you have the richness and the capacity to, of course, go and understand an organization by doing interviews and working with them, so forth, you're going to get a very deep understanding from that organization, and maybe even some lessons that can help you figure out how you would interact with other organizations. But when you have to do things sometimes that are the regional scale, city scale, country scale, you have to sometimes, accept that you're going to lose a lot of resolution, and you're going to work with data that is more aggregate, that is more imperfect, but that has the coverage that you will need to be able to approximate something, at a scale of 40 million people and 3.5 million square kilometers, like the size of Argentina, And you have to do it in a relatively short period of time with whatever data is available that has been passed on from the Kirchner government to the Macri government. Because there's also that they burn a lot of documents and stuff like that. There are also those type of stories. So in that case, I would agree that data is political when they burn the documents. But like you have like these other kind of like records that, for example, in health they didn't have them in education. They would have loved to be able to do this stuff, with education data they didn't have. So I don't see them as conflict. I see it like, hey, when you're trying to solve problems at different scale, if I would be consulting on your firm or your department, and you will have the money to pay people to do kind of like an ethnography and really figure out what's going on, that's fantastic. But we're far from being that rich usually when we're doing kind of like this type of investment, especially when we have to go at those larger scales. So we have to figure out how to do like a countrywide omelette with 2 eggs. Yeah.
But so now that you mentioned the Argentinian case, and going back to just for 30 seconds, going back to the question of how political data is, we all know that there are all sorts of ways in which governments make up the numbers, right? And that has been the case in Argentina. Argentina was out of the OECD for a while because they were making up the numbers of inflation and so on. And in some degree, to some extent, that is going on in many other places.
Inflation is a survey.
No, okay, but it's not only about inflation. The same happened in Greece, for instance, with the several numbers to help Greece to enter into the Eurozone. And we know now that it was done actually with the help of Goldman Sachs. And there are all sorts of stories about how this data is collected, how this data is processed, and how this data is used, right? And so I agree that, there are all sorts of political concerns there.
So I agree that you can manipulate and fabricate data. That I would not disagree.
Yeah.
Now, I would disagree that all data is equally easily to fabricate, because some has under the control of one person and another one requires a conspiracy theory. I would put a very big difference on the things that are under the control of a single individual and the capacity to lie, and the ones that require conspiracy theory. Because if you're lying, for example, in customs, you have to get all of the countries that you trade with to lie with you, because everything that goes in and out of your port goes in and out of another port. And that's how you kind of like find, and you reconcile those things when you work with that data. So in some sense, yes, I agree that data can be cooked. I don't agree that it's all equally cookable or that it's all equally cooked.
So, let's see, if there's, so I have to beg your indulgence, I will leave it to you, we're running a little behind, there is a lot of booze waiting to be drunk. Do you want to take 2 more quick questions?
Sure.
She has a question.
Okay, we have one here and then we have one back there, we're gonna take this, if you would make them very brief, thank you.
There isn't going to be any fighting. So
Oh, then take it back.
my question is a combination of something both of you said and what these 2 women were talking about. So I work in safety and regulations. You put up a page about mining and then you talked about robots replacing people. So the conversation in artificial intelligence as it relates to safety and warehouses is either we're replacing the workers with robots, or the robots are coexisting and working with the people. And my question is, are we using AI to predict vulnerable populations in the workplace as it relates to decision making? So if I allow these chemicals to go through, or this new piece of equipment, how many people will be injured? Not just, we're gonna replace the workers with robots, but are we thinking about how AI can help us predict who these vulnerable populations will be in the workplace? Because I get a mining report by state per month, and a lot of people are dying and getting hurt in mining accidents.
No, that's a good question. Yeah, I actually know quite a bit of.
Thank you. Turn it on, I'm sorry. Okay, I'll ask you, a benevolent dictator asks you to be very brief.
Yeah, with respect to the technology, one thing which I don't think you addressed is you might have a technology that fits your simple idea, but what about the technology that doesn't? How does it incorporate? And what about the use of technology that, say, fits your idea, but then is used against the moral of the society? Like, say, for example, social media, most people will say it's a good thing, but it also allows for cyberbullying, which is a very negative thing. So can you somehow control this within the your parameters there?
Thank you. So those are like two good questions. For like the technology, I think it goes back to like technology is instrumental. So technology always has the property of being good or bad, and that's true for all technologies. The knife to, you know, like cut the meat, or to kill, you know, like your friend or partner or whatever. No, it's not gonna be friend anymore after that, huh? You know, but like it has that property, like rockets, you know, to like go to the moon and put like satellites out, or you know, to bomb another country. And that property is because it's instrumental. Capital is capital, so you're never gonna be able to get out of that property because it's gonna exist. Of course, you know, we try to go to great lengths to try to maximize whatever are gonna be positive uses. But if you have something that augments your capacity to do something, you know, by making it more efficient or by allowing you to do new things, then possible set of things, it's, I would say, not possible to guarantee that would have a possible bad outcome would a person would want to use it in a bad way, okay? Because the only thing that technology does is enable an action, you know? But at the end, you know, the action comes from like whether the person is trying to hurt someone or offend someone or something like that. And, you know, the tool is just gonna facilitate that in one way or another. So it's always gonna be, you know, double-edged sword. Then, I don't know if you wanna add to that, and then we go to the question of your name again? Keisha?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So, okay, regarding the last question, I think, so you're right that I didn't say what I would do. I think that it depends on the technology that you have in mind. If you have in mind social media, for instance, and the kind of bad consequences or implications that it might have. So I'm totally for, you know, again, as I said, experimenting and knowing better about how it works. I think that we know better today than we knew, you know, just a few years ago. But I think that we need to continue experimenting and exploring how it works. But definitely, I'm in favor of taking this very seriously, because so what many people is saying, that is, I think that not a secret anymore for anyone. What many people is saying is that this has a huge impact in our political lives. So we need to be aware of that, and we need to make people aware of that, because that's, you know, the only way to defend democracy. So I'm not in favor of banning social media. Actually, even Lanier, who has this title, 10 Arguments to Delete Your Social Media Accounts, he's not in favor of banning it. He's in favor of having a different way of social media, a different kind of social media. So the problem, yeah, he's in favor of, you know, having, you know, not, so one of the problems he finds is about the business model that the social media that we have today are based in, right? So which is basically, you know, rely on our data and use these data to sell it to other people. But so that would be much more complex, and I don't have time to go so much into detail. But I think what is crucial is that we should all be aware about the impact of these different technologies, and we should teach the people about how to use them well. So it's again an idea of Howard Rheingold in his latest book, Net Smart, that we are just at the beginning of using these technologies. So we make all sorts of mistakes. That's how it goes. That is not a reason actually not to go farther, right? Because we need to make those mistakes. That's what it brings in, the idea of experimentation. But we need to be fully aware of, you know, what we can learn, the lesson we can learn at each step. I think that's fundamental. But there are other technologies. I want to say this also. There are other technologies that might be developed at some point that might, you know, point at replacing people as decision makers, and that's what some people working on artificial intelligence is having in mind. And regarding those technologies, there I would have a much more cautious approach. There I would think, I would say, we should, and that's, you know, consistent with what I said before, we should make choices actually not to promote this kind of research, right? Because that's not the kind of right use of technology that we should be seeking for, right? So for certain kind of research, for certain kind of technologies, I think that we should be super cautious. Not open to experimentation, as I said, regarding social media, but super cautious and put all our efforts in trying to keep the people who are working with that under control, controlled by the public. That's, for me, I think another urgent thing to do.
Yeah. Okay. First, I agree on, I would happily pay for Facebook, you know? I would pay $5 a month for Facebook, and I would think it's a steal, you know, because I get so much money's worth. But I'm rich, you know? And I don't think that many people in the world, you know, think of $5 the way that I think about $5. That doesn't mean anything. So in that case, I would agree, you know, that I would be happy to pay. The question is how much to the bottom would be able to go with that paid social media at what price? Then the question, I don't want to make not answer Keisha's question. So I think I have very good news to you, Keisha. First, if you go to like a business school or to many econ departments or to operations research, all that stuff, this question of future of work and who gets displaced and everything, it's like they're gonna roll your eyes because they're gonna say, oh, another one talking about this. It's so many people talking actually and working on that. The one paper that is kind of the seminal in that context, which is recently, is the Frey and Osborne paper from Oxford, that they have some measures on automatability of tasks and stuff like that. Is based on it, I believe half of it only, but it's a signal that in some sense you can start creating these measures and you can start thinking about the problem. And I think things are starting to get better, like Bromholson and McAfee have their own way of looking at it, and more people have been jumping into this ring. So there's a huge work on this future of work and who gets displaced and what jobs get conserved under what conditions and whatnot. The other stuff in the mining and the safety, which is important. Chile is a super mining country, so I talk a lot with miners, which it actually is quite interesting when you understand, how it operates. And in the context of mining, for instance, they trace very carefully a lot of different events that could lead to a fatality. So they don't just track fatalities. They have this pyramid and they say, okay, these are fatalities, these are high impact events, these are things that lead to high impact events, these are low impact events, and they kind of try to reduce the even simplest type of event to reduce the stuff that happens at the next step of the pyramid. And they actually, when they do that, they've increased the safety of the mines incredibly. In the context of automation, what they do is actually quite smart, from the perspective of the firm, because they never displace a worker. So what they do is new mine, autonomous. Old mine, workers. Old mine worker retire, you can replace it by an autonomous drill or something like that. So they are doing all of the replacement at the margin of people either retiring or of a new extractive activity. And that's how they expand. And in Chile, they have mines that operate autonomously. The same do in Australia, but they're doing it at that margin. So nobody is losing their job in that context, and they're going through kind of the system that is always at equilibrium as they are, changing, the workers, and the big machines for a machine with a little tiny robotic worker inside, in a way.
I think I'm afraid that I don't have so much good news, Cesar. So I share worries with you about this respect. So people, experts on AI who are predicting the pace at which people will be replaceable and replaced, is going to be accelerated, right? The half good news is that this is not going to affect only the vulnerable people. I mean, people. I work in a law school. Lawyers estimate that 50% of the tasks that lawyers do right now will be replaced by AI. The same applies. The same applies.
I mean, you don't risk a dangerous chemical killing you or not being able to have a baby.
I agree. I agree. Let me just finish. So I think, this will apply to lawyers, will apply to doctors, will apply to professors of universities, will apply to all sectors, right? But so I share with you the concern with the most vulnerable people, because it will always be the most vulnerable people, the losers of any kind of digital improvement. It has always been like that. So it would be a surprise that this time is an exception, right? So, and that's why I think, that's consistent with what I was trying to say all the time. So if we look back in the history, there have been many other revolutions, right, in our history. We have accumulated some lessons. We need to care about certain things, and we need to care fundamentally about the most vulnerable people, because again, in this revolution, the most vulnerable people will be harmed more than the other people.
But
right?
if that would be true, the most vulnerable people will be worse now than in the past. And they actually have been improving.
All right, benevolent dictator is not so benevolent anymore. Benevolent dictator is now hungry dictator, who wants to thank you very, very much for this lively discussion. Thank you to you for coming, both offline and online, for your engaged contributions. It doesn't have to end right here. As you can tell, they're not going to stop talking, so please grab a glass of wine. Let me just ask you before you go, in the interest of helping us all contribute to doing more for the future of democracy, we have left on your chair a collaboratively developed product created with collective intelligence with a number of people around principles for more participatory democracy. I'm glad to report that Democracy Fund that the Democracy Fund is actually funding the development of crowd law mechanisms for Congress beginning in the next term. So we would encourage you, if you would like to support this effort, at least in name, to please sign and leave it on your chair, and we will collect it afterwards or sign online. And with that, let me thank our speakers and remind you that Eric Kleinenberg will be talking about Palaces for the People in November. We'll invite you to that and after we pick the date. And I invite you to join us for a glass and further conversation. Thank you.